Morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Have-
Oh,
Is everybody recovered from the national holiday last on Friday there?
what was the national holiday on Friday?
Taylor
Ron?
Swift's release of the album.
I,
I
you
wasn't.
know, I so my wife was sick all weekend, and she like from the couch late last night goes, "Did Taylor Swift release a new album?" And I was like, I don't know. It was,
Yeah, she
I
definitely did. Definitely did. It was kind of the center of the universe in my house. So we had it was kind of a cool thing she did. So she had a release party where for 3 days you could go watch the album in a movie theater. So that was
okay.
it, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the album got released like Thursday night at midnight, or I don't know, some in the middle of the night. And I was informed that I wasn't allowed to listen to the album until after they saw the movie at like 7 p.m. on Friday.
Now,
Uh,
is that hard for you? Did you
to
have
be
to?
clear, I had no intentions of listening to the album. Still have yet to. I've heard a couple songs, but haven't listened to it yet. So it was
yeah,
easy. Hey,
my
I like when
oldest
the
daughter.
girls. I like when the girls make easy requests. That's
Yeah.
great.
My oldest daughter is a Swiftie, and I asked her, I said, "Did you download and listen to all the songs?" She said, "Oh yeah."
Oh yeah.
I was like, "All of them?" She said, "Yeah, for sure."
Overnight, like on
Yeah.
Friday night, Friday morning, or whatever. Yeah, for sure. That's the thing. Yeah, we've been through it before. My girls we're a music family, so they like to catch those releases. They stay up too late and then have a miserable day at school the next day, usually. But the movie thing was pretty cool.
That
It
is a
is
neat
cool.
idea. Yeah. My my freshman, I don't think they haven't talked about it at all. Now, and what's funny, so my younger one who's in sixth grade is fine with Taylor Swift, but not really a fan. Like I feel like when you if you think about like whatever the not the hype curve, but like as is the nature of cultural evolution and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, she's not actively an anti Taylor Swift person, but
Mm.
like is definitely not in it. Whereas the older one will tell you that they're like, whatever. But when you go look at their most played songs, like it's very clearly Swift heavy.
Yeah.
Um, so
Mm.
love that data. Love looking at that data.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in my house would call themselves a Swiftie, but they definitely know all the things, right? Like all the details. It was great. We were on our way home from a volleyball game on football game on Saturday, and we had to listen to the album. That was on the ride home. Those were the only songs I heard. And they were explaining this one song, part of the movie was they gave she said why she wrote the song or what it was about. So this one song, they were like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's about maybe some ex-boyfriend or she had, they had some names of people. I was like, I wonder if it was about that record producer that she like had a
Mm.
beef with. And they were like, "Oh yeah, that's right." So I was chalk one up. I was like, "That's all I have to offer this
Yeah,
conversation."
figured it out. Yeah. Ronnie, do you have a stack of T-shirts behind you?
Those are no, man, new Clearview commodity shirts here.
All
So
right.
you kind of covered up my
Wow.
life. You do when you do t-shirts don't take up near as much room as hoodies. I have like a truckload of hoodies that I have to deliver here.
All right. Did you
Yeah.
send my triple X in the mail?
Well, that's why I asked for your address this morning, and I'll
You
get you
did?
a triple
Well,
X.
yeah, I was working my real job this
Yeah,
morning, so it was
exactly.
not
Yeah,
in
that's
my.
all right. I'll get you a
Hey,
triple X, but
I'll send you my address over
there we
email.
go. There we go. Yeah. Uh, I'll get you a triple X, but I had you as 2X, right? As the
Yeah, I can fit 2X probably. Yeah.
get you whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, old habits, right? You're right. It's probably 2X is probably the right way. I'm wasting away here in
Exactly. Exactly.
Massachusetts. We should introduce Rob
Yeah.
Rodney.
Yeah, Rob Houston. Rob, good to have you, man. Um,
Thanks. Good to be here.
yeah, anxious to see where this discussion goes. So, just a little bit about Rob. Rob and I only met a couple years ago, probably maybe 3 years ago, right? When I was with
Yeah.
Indigo. But it was funny, my whole career, these guys have been, every time I talk about what I'm up to in the grain business, somebody was like, "Hey, have you ever met Rob Houston? Like, I feel like you guys would get along." And I'm like, "No, never met him. Heard a lot about him, but." I grew up at Cargill for the most part. Rob, you were Bungie, right? Do I have that right?
Most recently, but yeah, I worked for
Okay.
Cargill as well. I was
Oh,
a
you did.
sales
All
leader.
right, that's why your name came up. But
Yeah.
what year did you leave Cargill then?
So I was with Cargill from 2002 to 2005 as a sales leader. I led well, in the beginning, it was two FSGs, is what they call them, Farm Service
Yeah.
Groups, one in Mount Vernon, Illinois, and one in Vincennes, Indiana.
Okay.
And then later, those two merged together to be the Lower Ohio River FSG, and I was over both of those as a sales leader.
I gotcha. So you left the day I walked in. I started at
All
Cargill in
right.
2005. So yeah,
Okay.
but
And it wasn't long after that that I went to Growmark, and I think you worked for Growmark as well, right?
man, how do I not know this? Yeah, yeah, that's right. So when did you leave Growmark? The day before I started there?
Oh shit, Rodney's
Probably
coming in. We
so
better make a.
2007 to 2011 was when I was with Growmark.
Yeah, so I came over in 2012. So yeah, Rob catches wind that I'm going to be there, and he
It's like when you see the trade on the front of the New York Times or whatever. You're like, all right, I'm fading the position. I'm out. I'm out.
exactly. That's right.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
I've listened to some
yeah,
of your previous podcasts as well, and some of your philosophy as it relates to grain marketing. And I think you and I've talked about this before. It sounds like we're cut from the same cloth. Trust and transparency are two things that I've always built my marketing philosophy on, and I think you're pretty much the same way.
100%, 100%. Yep. So what were you doing at Growmark then when you were there?
They hired me as the manager of Agrivisor when they first brought the two together, Illinois Farm Bureau and Growmark, with Growmark being a majority share owner of it. And one of the things they brought me in for was my expertise with options and hybrid grain contracts. They wanted me to build a portfolio of products that would enable them to compete with the Cargills and the ADMs and the Bungies of the world. So we did that. I developed a portfolio of products with my team. I had a great team. Corey Winstead, Graham Utter, Dale Durkholz, Paula McGowan. It was a number of us there. And um, Crossover Solutions is what we named it. And it stayed alive for, gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years, I guess.
Yeah. No, yeah, I came in, obviously you were gone, but came in and, was able to do a lot of the things we were doing at Cargill on the agrivisor side. So I got to be really good friends. I actually worked for Corey Winstead for a little while. I think
Yeah.
he must have been my rep when I started at Growmark, kind of my, liaison between agrivisor and Grain Co. at the time.
Yeah.
But ended up working for him. He ended up being general manager of FS Grain while I was there. So yeah,
Yeah. Bridget Chenoweth was another one that was worked with me, and I had a great team. She was awesome as well.
gotcha. So you left there. Where'd you head after that?
So after that, I went to New York, worked for BNP Paribas. At the time, it was the largest bank in the world with 3.2 trillion in assets, and I had a really interesting job. I was working for their FCM, and they initially hired me for the exchange cleared futures and options with their clients, but I also worked for their OTC desk for agricultural derivatives. And that was where, I really kind of, found the value of transparency. Because I would go to clients and I had this unique position. It was really new to the bank, and I would dare say it was probably new to the industry. I could say, hey, look, if you want, full transparency and you want to know what your costs are up front, I said I can help you with exchange cleared futures and options. And I said, we can leverage strategies, with standard products. And I said, and I can even help you build those into hybrid products if you wish. I said, or if you need the credit and you don't want to have to manage some of these complex positions, then we can offer you OTC products. And I said, so your choice. I said, you tell me, how can I help? And it was a great value proposition. And then, with BNP Paribas at the time, I said, being the largest bank in the world with 3.2 trillion in assets, that was also a value added as well, because when you're doing business with an FCM and you have all of your margin stacked with that FCM. You want to make sure they're a stable one that
Yeah.
won't go out of business. And so that was another kind of, you could call it a pitch if you want, but it was the truth, right? I mean, I believed in what I was selling, which is so important when you're in sales.
Was that right around
Uh,
when Refco blew up too, Rob?
so Refco, but what was the name? MF Global.
Yeah.
MF Global is what blew up during that time frame.
Cool.
And I had just, there was a client from Canada that had just decided to go with me for two reasons. One, they wanted, to use exchange cleared futures and options, but they wanted to, kind of understand how the OTC side worked by using those. And then the second piece was, the foundation and the stability of being with the largest bank in the world. And they moved their positions, all of them, over right before MF Global blew up, and they were like, "Holy cow! You just made me look like a genius, right?" But anyway, fun times.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the customer there for you would have been like food companies, or who were you working with there?
Food companies, conglomerates. We had large cotton clients, large, corn, beans, and wheat. A lot of even companies like Gavilon at the time, a lot of these large companies will have syndicates, which are made up of multiple banks that are offering a large line of credit or something along that nature. So we participated in a syndicate with many of the largest agricultural companies in the world.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, never had exposure to that part of the business really. Um, yeah, cool. So left there. What year did you leave there?
So that was around 2011, 2012. And from there, I went to the CME Group, where I was managing director of the commercial segment for commodities, primarily energy, agricultural, and metals. So that's where, I got to meet all of the majors, certainly on the ag side, which I knew a lot of, but as well on the energies, BP, Shell, you name it. So
Yeah.
it was, and at the time, that was our focus was energy. ICE, Intercontinental Exchange, had come on at that time and kind of captured a lot of the market share that they had with WTI, with their Brent crude contract. So we were launching a Brent crude contract that would enable our customers to, you know, have margin efficiencies by trading both Brent crude on the CME Group as well as WTI. And then all the options products that went along with that, natural gas, et cetera. So uh, great experience. Global team. I had a team in Singapore, Hong Kong, London, Chicago, New York, Houston, and Calgary.
I remember when ICE launched the lookalike corn futures. Was that while you were there
Mhm.
at the CME Group? I mean, it was
Yeah, yeah.
there were a lot of press releases, and it was ultimately a fart in the wind, right? Like I can't
Yeah, and
even.
I have to, give them credit for the way they did it because they acknowledged all the players in the space, right? A lot of people will look at certainly the ADMs, Bungies of the Cargills in the world and say those are really important clients. And they are, because they're the ones that carry the open interest in those contracts, right? But from there, you also need the liquidity. So you got to focus on the props. You need the banks as well and the hedge funds. All of those things, liquidity and open interest are the two most important things to have a futures contract take off. And they tried all those things, gave
Yeah.
incentives to all those different things, but at the end of the day, the industry wasn't just they weren't ready for that
I
for
mean,
whatever reason.
yeah. I mean, I remember we looked at it pretty closely. I think because I was still at Cargill at the time, and so we had to keep. I mean, one, it was at the end of the day, it was inconvenient, right? It was like, okay, here's
Yeah.
another source of liquidity and pricing for the same thing. You struggled to imagine that it would add more liquidity to the market, right? I mean, we um, and but like as I've done other things, like I recognize what's interesting to me is ICE became is still one of the big swap data repositories, and
Mhm.
so and it was and I don't know if CME does it. I would assume they do it now, but back then I think it was really just ICE was doing it in terms of the big exchanges in the U.S. And so I could see there's a lot of value being around being able to settle everything all in one place and deal with weird OTCs, but ultimately settle them within the exchange, and deal with margins and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, obviously it didn't go anywhere.
Well, and along those same lines, Gabe, what's I think transpiring today is the value of data. And I think you mentioned that earlier. You know, the data exists for everything that's exchange cleared, but a lot of that same data, it does not exist publicly for the OTC side. But I think that's about to change. There's a lot of brokers that trade that OTC environment, and that data, the market data is very valuable, especially from a historic perspective. So
But I think you can get SDR, swap data repository reporting. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to go down the whole Dodd-Frank world.
That's one time in your life, Gabe, I'd
It was a
imagine.
fun time. Yeah, man, Cargill got fined. Here, I'll tell this story. This is pretty funny. So I mean, Cargill got a big fine on the whole swap dealer thing, right? I forget the exact. I mean, I think most of those fines end up being called was it failure to supervise or something like that? Is the it's like the catch-all when you get in trouble. That's what that. But there were a couple things going on, and basically Cargill was reporting the business I was in was reporting the margin that we were making. I would say generously described as incorrectly, and so it was something that was really frustrating to me because it was the side of the business that was dealing with the larger companies. So your
mhm.
big food companies or whatever. And so on our side, we'd always been super clear about like immediately showing what the value of the thing was and basically showing you what the margin was. And so we were forced to adopt what was ultimately a very convoluted way of doing it. So that was a big pain in the butt. So I'm laughing because what happened was, as part of this, so when you work for a swap dealer, even more so than an FCM, literally everything you do is recorded, right? Like recorded, and even at that point, they had ML models combing through stuff, looking for things and whatever. So I swear a lot. I swear less than I used to, but like especially if you put me on a trading desk, it's like I might as well be a sailor, right? So um, and that was true across all forms of communication. And I knew better, right? I knew better, but I also like I wasn't doing anything wrong, and I also understood there's this whole idea around closing loops. Like when from a regular our compliance officer always made clear, he's like, look, you're going to have these weird conversations, or there's going to be problems that you address over email to start with, and then you end up talking about them. He's always make sure you close the loop via email, because when we go back and look, we're not going to get that conversation you had, right?
Yeah.
So
No,
like
that's not where the failure of supervision came in. There
no,
there
no,
were
no, no. So what happened was, so one of the things those models look for is swearing, right? They look because that like
yeah.
you can imagine, I use it in the same way people use vocal fillers, but for somebody that doesn't swear normally, right, it can show a point of stress. Anyway, so like I said, the methodology for reporting the margin was convoluted. So somebody had asked me about it over chat or something, and so I first like wrote like a paragraph talking about how stupid and idiotic it was, and then I proceeded to lay out like the exact argument about like here's what it's doing and here's why it's stupid, and with lots of swearing. Anyway, so the compliance officer was like, yeah, we did see that. He's like, but it actually showed that the training worked because you understood all of it really, really well, right? So this was pre getting fined or even I think investigation. It was something that came up because of all the swearing. And he called it cute, I think. But he's like yeah, he's like, so it showed up because of the vocabulary, but at the same time it was funny because he's like, oh, it actually showed that you really understood like the process, and so the training was working. I was like, all right, oh great.
This guy's
um
really smart. He just swears a lot.
well, he wasn't assessing my intellect. It's just that I was able to pay attention to the training and regurgitate it. But yeah, Dodd Frank. Oof. Yeah. So good times. Glad to be not sit in the middle of that right now. Although I guess the regulations are getting peeled back every day, so who knows? Just
We'll
broadly
see.
speaking, um, maybe life's a lot easier there. Um, Although it's probably not interesting to most of the folks we talk with. So Rob, so what are you doing today, Rob? Not right now, but
So
figuratively.
yeah, so I've got a startup called Innovative Grain, and we start with data as the foundation, essentially connecting your grain accounting data to Microsoft Fabric, so that you can visualize that data, sort of business intelligence, or whether you use, I came from large agricultural companies where we had Tableau, Power BI, and data scientists that could, create all the different graphs and things like that. But if you go down to that mid-tier and smaller cooperative level, companies, a lot of them don't have those business intelligence divisions, right? So being able to uh, get the software connected to the grain accounting system is the first step. That's kind of the base foundation. So you can see all of your inbound tickets, your shipments, your weights, grades, moisture, form material, all of those things live. And then it enables your accounting department to reconcile and be a lot more efficient as well, seeing everything automatically fed into this machine. And then from there, once that base model is set up, you can also look at third-party data connected as a single source, a unified source of data, so that you can actually track things like market share. I used to call it share of wallet, but on the grain side, you'd call it share of production. That is, in the past, it used to be you'd go to an elevator and I'd say, okay, show me your list of top 100 customers. And they'd have it. Here you go. It's an Excel spreadsheet, top 100 customers. And what they had them ranked as was number one was the client who brought me the most grain.
Mhm.
For
And
sure.
that's great. And everybody has that. It's really easy to do. But what I would often find is you go down to like number 14 on the list. So it didn't make the top 10, but that client was actually the largest client in their draw area. They just weren't getting that much of the his share of production. So he was ranked number 14 on the list, but clearly he should have, from the size and the volume that producer generated, in another list, he could have been ranked number one, right?
Mhm.
But not every grain elevator gets to see that data or understand it because they don't know how many acres that farmer produces. And today with trusted advisors, you can get that data because you need to know the cost of production and the break-even analysis of a particular farmer, and help them sell at profitable levels. But if you're a grain elevator, and especially if you haven't developed a position that is a trusted advisor to all these producers that ask those types of questions, then you need this, third party data. Not that it's 100% accurate, because it's not, it never is. A farmer may have sold a piece of land, 2 weeks ago, or bought a larger piece of land 3 months ago, but at least it's directionally accurate. And from there, if you're a grain elevator, those are the things you need in order to understand market share and then share of production by individual entity.
So Rob, this
So
feels like a
that's
pretty
that's
big,
just another place.
feels like a decent move away from kind of the rest of your history that you were running us through. So what drove that? I mean, so I think we've hit on this podcast a number of times. Obviously, technology plays a huge role in anybody doing financial services types of work. So not a shocker that you've been exposed to a lot of that, but curious on what's the story on making the change?
Uh, the pain points of, um, I mean, because I've lived it. I've worked, as vice president of origination for Gavilon. From there, I went to Bungie, and that's when I kind of got introduced to the technology side. I was director of customer solutions and services, so I was over their mobile app, their customer portal, their website, Salesforce administration, and things of that nature. So, getting to see everything from the technology side, and then all of a sudden you really understand, the pain point is data. As large as we were, regardless of the company that I worked for, whether it was Cargill or Gavilon or Bungie, having all of that data accessible in one place just didn't exist. It doesn't today for most green companies. So I had a friend of mine that asked me a little over 2 years ago, had I ever heard of Microsoft Fabric? And I was like, "No, I haven't heard of that." And he said, "Well, you should go. It's some really cool software. Microsoft Fabric is absorbing Microsoft Power BI, but it is obviously in the cloud. It uses Azure cloud is kind of the base, but it enables all of this data to be come in and unified in a single source, so that you can visualize it, analyze it with, whether you use Python or machine learning notebooks, whatever the case may be. It just it enables all of your data to be accessible in one place, and then it democratizes that data so that anybody in your organization that wants to see it, needs to see it, you can allow them to. You can even set permissioning levels and things like that. So you've got different levels of compliance, who can see the data, who can edit the data, who can manipulate the data, et cetera. So very powerful tool. It's still somewhat new. It's been around for a little couple of years, maybe 3 years, I guess. But most of the people, when you ask them, have you ever heard of Microsoft Fabric? It's still very new. So
Yeah, only the people that are forced to switch from Power BI know about
there you go.
this thing.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
fair.
and Power BI is not officially dead yet, right? But it's on its
No,
yeah.
no, it'll still, they're still using the name Power BI, but it's been absorbed and it is part of the Fabric platform now.
just say, I got to imagine that Power BI infrastructure will sit around for at least another decade. Like there's two, if not longer. If there's one thing I've learned,
Yeah.
like, yeah. I mean, and so where I am now over Little Leaf, where they're heavy, we are heavy Power BI consumers, but have that similar challenge, Rob, that you're talking about, where there's not a lot of expertise in manipulating Power BI to make it show you what you want, on top of just our raw data problems.
Well,
Um,
right. And even if you go back to some of the larger organizations that I worked for, we had those tools, but we would explain a set of graphs or charts that we wanted. They would provide them to us. A data scientist would, bang something out and say, well, what does this look like? But then you even found yourself at that point saying, okay, great, but I want to drill down even further. And so you ended up importing the data into Excel, right? You've all been through it.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh,
and so it's, you never, once you understand the value of data and you get access to it, it's just never ending. You want to drill down more and learn more, whether it's forecasting or seeing patterns from historical data, really powerful stuff. So, our value proposition is enabling those mid-tier and smaller grain companies to be able to compete at the larger levels. And then, you throw in everything that's going on with AI today, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then even the digital growth strategy. You know, uh, One of the things that I discovered in my recent job was we would update our hours of operation on the website. Okay. But if something mechanically happened and broke down, we'd send out text alerts for everybody who had subscribed to text alerts. We send out emails. We called people that we knew were shipping, but undoubtedly someone would show up and says, "Well, it says here you're open,"
No.
and they might be looking at Google My Business, or they might be looking at Bing Places, or they might be looking at Apple Business Connect because they used Apple Maps, not because they didn't know how to come to your location, but
right.
they wanted to, if traffic or a wreck had occurred, they wanted to know what the next fastest route was, is maybe they're coming from the field or from the bin. So you see all these platforms, these digital platforms, and you understand the need that you really want to be able to communicate with your customers at their level, not where you want them to communicate with, but where they prefer to communicate with. So that's another piece of leveraging technology to meet your customers where they're at and communicate where they want, when they want, and how they want.
Man, so like one of the driving points in my career, Rob, I was at Cargill. We were in Seneca, Illinois. I'm a young kid. I'm new to the grain business. And we had a safety get together, right? So the whole FSG comes together. There's like 150 employees all in Seneca under this gigantic tent. We, shut down the elevator, locked it out so we didn't have to wear like PPE essentially walking around this tent. So the whole elevator was locked out, sent postcards to customers, messages, everything. And I'm sitting there, enjoying my pork chop sandwich or whatever. And in drives, gravel road, a mile long. In comes a semi. It's Ryan Widman. I'll never forget it. And he pulls in with a loaded semi. And everybody just looks at each other like, oh man, what do we do? And the only answer was, sorry, Ryan, you got to go home. Right. And that just killed me. And like, since then, it's been like, man, how do we keep that stuff from happening, right? It's just interesting.
And there are tools out there. Ideally, what I wanted for our merchandisers was to be able to enter it in one spot that, their hours of operation and whether they had changed. And then from there, with APIs and technology, be able to update it in all those other different places, plus send outbound messages. That way the merchandiser can continue to focus on, adding real value to producer customers versus banging out on all these technologies to try to keep them informed.
Yeah.
So that's I think a powerful piece that, and again, some of the larger corporations have that technology, but you get to the mid tier and the smaller ones, and they're still doing it the way we used to do it, right?
So I'm not gonna make you bucket yourself. You can weasel your way out of this if you want, but you're not a software company then, and you're not. Are you a data company? Are you a consulting company? What do you?
I guess you could call it a consulting company. We specialize in data and digital strategy and growth, but yeah, I would classify it as a consulting company, I guess. Basically, you get, all the different years of experience that I've had with all the different grain companies and banks and the CME group that I've worked for. Because when you're looking at, there's a couple of things when you're looking at data. You want to get the most you can from it, right? And so efficiencies are the kind of the low-hanging fruit, the first thing that you go after. If you've got some processes that are a bottleneck or a pain point for you, leveraging AI and data are some of the fastest ways to overcome those pain points and get more efficient. And some of that has to do with some of the experiences that I've had, but then also leveraging data is just, getting to that point of talking about share of production and market share. Those are things that grain elevators have talked about for years, but it is very difficult to measure, and especially to have confidence in that measurement. So the closer we can get to that, the more strategic you can be, the more value, hopefully, that you can add as well. So that's kind of where we're headed.
So what are the biggest challenges you're facing when you're trying to turn this data back over? I mean, it's their own data. They should understand it. What challenges do you have? I think a lot of people, Rob, would be shocked that this is a business model in the grain business, right? Like,
Fair enough.
I'm not, obviously, but what types of things do you struggle with?
Well, even if you're connected to the same grain accounting software, right? You've got an API, you've connected to it, connecting for the next 15, 20, 100 customers with that same grain accounting software should be pretty easy, right? And it is to a certain degree, especially the API part. But depending on the geography of your client base, and most of them are spread out all over the entire Corn Belt, some companies call a futures contract embedded into a grain contract an HTA. Some call it futures first. Some call it an NBE. Some call it futures only. So even in the same grain accounting software, it may be called different names. So it's not necessarily turnkey where you just flip a switch and everything else comes on.
Yeah.
One of the big challenges we had at previous organization that I worked for is in South America, they wanted what we had in North America, but you couldn't just flip a switch and turn it on because the grain accounting systems were different. And so that's some of the pain points that I see is, kind of having that expertise to look at a set of data, regardless of the geography, and they kind of understand what it is and say, this is what we need to do with that. This is, the way they want to look at that. And then, ultimately, every client's different too, no different than farmers helping with a farmer with risk management. Every grain company is a little bit different as well. They've got their own set of priorities, the things that are important to them. So understanding what those needs are and then selling to that need is kind of the key, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so the market share thing's interesting. USDA data has gotten kind of what should I say, more holes in it over the last few years.
Yeah.
So specifically, I imagine you're using like look backs for like county average yield, right? Is that how you're coming across this production type thing?
It's certainly one way to do it. Yep.
Yeah.
And then especially when you're thinking from a historical standpoint, and then when you're thinking of, I was listening to your podcast and I was heard you talking about the corn to soybean ratio, uh, and you know projections or predictions, if you will, about what the future might hold, is an important thing as well. I don't think any one particular grain company has that down to an exact science. But everybody's got their own methods of being able to apply that and then leverage it and by accessing the data and allowing your employees to make the best use of that. That's so important, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't think there's a silver bullet out there that if there was, I think everybody would be doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, Rodney, I think the guys at TELUS, the former TELUS or Descartes, no, the TELUS guys, they got to a point where they could tell pretty well whether somebody had planted corn or beans, and
Oh yeah,
um,
with satellite data.
yeah.
And you can even, even if you look at for sustainability purposes, right? That land that's idle over the winter. Uh, did you use no-till methods or did you use conventional till prior to that? You can get really granular data at the vector level, to find out some of those things as well. So uh, data is super powerful, and there is a tremendous amount of data. People do need to get paid for their data, but also, because we've heard that, especially as it comes to farmers, farmers need to understand the value of their data and they need to get paid for it, right? 100% agree with that. But there's a second point as well. If they have all that data, okay, how do you use it? How do you gain from it?
Yeah.
Uh, Before you even think about selling it or pieces of it to others, how can you leverage it yourself and make the best use of that data?
Yeah, that's
I
right.
think
Data
that's the
is
opportunity.
only valuable if you turn it into money, right? I
That's
mean,
right.
your operations or whatever, there's got to be another piece to it. And that's what I've seen is the biggest problem. My days at Indigo when I was talking to these grain companies, it was like, yeah, we believe all this stuff to be true, right? Like we could be better at this. Like we might do make more money if we had these things, but the proof wasn't there yet, right? That felt like the hump we can't get over. Like if I have this information, go back to your number 14 on the list. Cool. That seems like a thing I should know, right? But unless I can turn that number 14 guy into my number one guy, it's just not worth it, right?
Well, and in some cases, let's take the opposite side of that, right? Let's say your number one drops to number 14, just from a volumetric standpoint. You
Mm.
know, and looking at all the demographics and psychographics of your customer base, don't want to get too nerdy here,
Yeah.
but if your number one farmer has no sons or daughters and no nephews or nieces, and he's 68 years old or 72 years old, do you think he's going to be your number one farmer 5 years from now? Probably not, right? So, are there succession planning? If it is your number one customer, where do you think those acres will go? There's a lot to be gained from looking at not just the data from a numbers perspective, but also looking at the demographics and the psychographics of farmers as well. Demographics being age, location, education, size. those are the demographics. And then from the psychographics, are your customers analytical? Are they intuitive? Are they progressive? Are they traditional? All of those things are data points that can be leveraged to create mutual value for the grain company, but also value for your customers. You don't want to send a lot of data and analytical information to someone who makes decisions from an intuitive standpoint, right? So, and vice versa. If you do have a guy that's extremely analytical, you want to provide them with as much data as you can so that they can make, good decisions. So getting to know your customers. Right now, a lot of that exists in the head of the merchandiser out there. And a lot of organizations have CRM platforms out there, but still that information is in the head of the merchandisers. It hasn't been, input into your CRM platform, which is probably where it should be. But again, it's got to be for the right reasons. A lot of these grain merchandisers that work for grain companies are, their families are farmers themselves, right? So you want to be able to collect data for the purpose of adding value to your customers. You never want to be collecting data, for manipulation or margin extraction. Rodney, I look at your business model and I can only imagine that some mornings you wake up with a little bit of ass in your gut and you're like, how can I add value to my clients today? You're never thinking, how can I take value from my clients? If you had that mindset, your business model would be short-lived, right?
For sure.
But when you have this mindset that, how can I add value to my clients? Well, then word spreads, your reputation grows, and your business is built off that. So I truly think that's the way to move forward.
Yeah, the CRM thing's interesting. So I've been battling the CRM thing kind of my whole career. It's funny. I think, there's this thing about when you enter information about a farmer into that as like the merchandiser originator, and you turn it over like to Cargill or Growmark, right? You suddenly feel kind of replaceable, right? I know that's what the holdback is on all these things. But I think to your point earlier, like the person that's able to leverage that data and really help their farmer, right? Like, hey, I'm tracking percent sold is like one of these no-brainers, right? I'm not sure that farmers would be super comfortable if they knew that these grain companies are tracking percent sold somehow, right? Like it's almost like if you could see what Google knows about you, you know, you would never use Google again, right? And I think so on the farmer side of things, for sure, people are trying to get some window. Some people, not all, and actually, I don't think it's enough, are trying to get some window into what percent sold that farmer is. Man, if you're using that to like help a farmer manage his risk, then that's a great use for that tool, I think, right? The other
For
thing
sure.
I always said about CRM is Far I like talking to me. I think my wife likes talking to me. I don't think in general farmers just want to talk to me to, shoot the crap. So it's like, hey, if you're gonna call me with something relevant, right? Like if I'm calling about old crop corn and this guy's been out of old crop corn for 6 months,
Exactly.
I'm just annoying him, right? And
That's
that's
absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, and that to that point, the data point there is, does that farmer have on-farm storage, right?
that's right.
And so when it's May or April, well, let's just use May as a good example. If you're a merchandiser in the olden days, they would just hand you a list, call every one of these farmers and see if you can buy their grain. Well, wouldn't it be great if that list was curated with only farmers that had storage?
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you've got, grain and DP or in storage, if you're a location that has commercial storage, that the farmers that have grain there and you can maybe call them about pricing opportunities and add value. But for others that have sold their grain in the fall, don't bother them, right? I mean, they're not thinking about selling old crop grain in May. They might be thinking about selling new crop, but again, that's a different conversation, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Ronnie,
Yeah.
can we go back to not enough people are looking at, trying to dig out what percent sold somebody is? Like, because if you're using that, like you said, for this purpose of solving, helping them be a better the farmer, right? Accomplish whatever their financial goals are. So I'm curious, genuinely, like where I feel like that's a really tough. If we use that as a proxy for how much am I willing to tell you about what I'm doing to help me out, right? Like that's really the question you're getting at, and whether or not it's recorded in a CRM system. Even if I tell, other like as soon as I tell you something, right, it's not hidden information anymore.
Yep.
Um, and so um, I also think, and I think everybody here would agree, it's unreasonable to expect a company, right, to have a strong set of ethics around, be able to make as a company a decision, right? We rely on individuals to make those decisions, but as the information becomes, democratized within the organization, right? Like now, that so like that, those are the concerns that I think are floating around people's heads, right? What different angles of that, but basically that. I mean, so one of the things I go back to is if I think it's unreasonable for a farmer to trust again the corporate entity of Cargill, right? Now they're doing anything illegal or nefarious, but ultimately they're using that data, right, to make their bigger
Mhm.
decisions and that kind of thing. You know, like what how do you help somebody, I guess, get across the line in terms of basically saying, what that trade is worth it? Like what, you because in Rob, actually, to go back to what you were talking about before in terms of flipping the positioning. So is your number one customer going to be your number 14? Where are they at from a demographic perspective? Like that feels like a risk conversation to me, which I will say I've always struggled to convince people to focus on a risk, right, and address a risk until they've lived it, right. And once somebody goes through that stuff, generally you don't have to describe the pain to them anymore. But until they've done that, like getting them to say, oh yeah, it's worth that investment to understand when's my number one going to drop or not, or that. But similarly, it feels like a similar conversation around, Rodney, like, hey, let me explain this counterfactual where you don't give that information. Here's how it hurts you. Like what I'm curious what those conversations are like, or what you do to help somebody get over that line. But
Well, from a merchandiser perspective, especially a younger merchandiser that's just entering into the business and they don't have, the expertise that someone like Rodney has, they get this in their mind that, wow, the market's rallied significantly. It's up at a point where we think there's going to be resistance. I mean, a lot of farmers should be selling today, right? And they'll get that in their head and they'll make these outbound phone calls. And the examples that I always try to give to them is I said, okay, imagine we're at an event and a farmer comes up because we just gave a supply and demand outlook, and the farmer says, should I be selling today? Right. Well, okay, it depends, right? If you're a farmer that is 100% sold, and 75% sold for new crop, uh, and you don't have any cash flow issues and you've got the storage, your answer to him should be one thing. But the farmer who's 0% sold has cash flow issues, has debt, has no on-farm storage. That's a completely different answer as to whether or not they should sell versus the first farmer. And of course, there's farmers in between. Well, is right. So you've got to get to the point where you're asking a lot of questions, and you can't just if you're someone new out of college and fresh in the seat, you can't just ask farmers what percent sold they are or how many acres did they produce and what their cost of production is. It takes time to build trust and rapport, to get to those sort of levels where Rodney's at. So, it's just, maybe in time, maybe the answer there, and it's up to each individual to try to build trust, through transparency and things of that nature. But until you get there, you don't want to be asking the wrong questions. I don't know if that really answers your question, Gabe. Rodney, you may have more to add to that.
Well, the other thing I'd say is what's important and what hasn't been there is okay, I get that experience and I'm comfortable asking this farmer this question, right? So now we're entering into a trust scenario, right? Farmer told me how many acres he farms. He trusts me with that information. I think it's on me to have a place to store that information, right? To like leverage that information. If I'm not using the information he gave me to help his farm, then it's again, it's like he wasted I didn't uphold my end of the bargain in that scenario.
But I get, go back in time, right? You're at Cargill, right? And you're asking somebody those questions, and part of this is, I will say, I think it's rare that the information that an individual farmer has is actually is materially useful, right? There are obviously moments where having that information as a Cargill is helpful, but
Useful to the bigger company, you're
to the
saying.
bigger company.
Totally
But
agree.
like a single farmer's data is actually not that interesting, right?
Yeah.
Like and so I think it's this. I'm wrestling with this, this idea, and it's not new, right? But this idea that, like, as a individual, as a small business owner, right? I think my data is certainly very important to me, and it's very valuable to me. I think I can see things that you can do with it. I'm worried that it's going to get used against me if you have it. But at the same time, again, at a Cargill, very rarely are they going to look at an individual farmer and single them out for some reason beyond what happens anecdotally without a big system anyway. Because the merchandiser knows they do or don't have on farm storage, because the merchandiser originators heard, like, they talked to the banker, right? And they shared some piece of information, whatever, all that. I think that stuff has all, well predates computers, and is probably a bigger risk from a data perspective than anything they're handing over in those conversations. So we had Heather Gieske on a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about, like, carbon credits is the like she and I think she made a really strong argument for it, and I think I agree with her that carbon credits or sustainable practices are really the first time that there's been a clear way to monetize data you generate on your farm, right? That, like, there's enough value in the data generated for just your farm that is quantifiable. Um, and so, like, I guess going back, trying to bring it back to this other thing. So for an individual, right, or again, a single small business, recognizing those conceits, I put my trader hat on. One of the things, so when we're looking at a possible trade, there's always reasons not to do the trade, always, because you never have every piece of information. That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
That's
Um,
correct.
and so, like, a huge part of that process is, like, going through, well, what are the 50 things that I'm like, I'd like to know these things before I make a trade here. But then what happens is, like, that's a super normal human thing to do. And one of the tools you develop is going through and going, what would I do differently if I learned this? Right? Like, and go through. And then you weed that down to, it may get rid of your list, and then you're pulling the trigger because you're like, well, this is this is it. Like, and this is what I'm making the trade on, and it's this unknown by this is the bet I'm making. But I guess similarly for thinking about a farmer, like, have you guys gone through those conversations with those guys? I mean, like, all right, you don't want to tell me your percent sold. Like, I hear you. Let's talk about what you're scared of, or what, not even what you're scared of, but what is it you think you're giving up? Like, is that where that conversation goes, or is it more, Rodney, kind of what you're talking about in terms of, like, we're just building a trust, and so it's this: I tell you I'm going to do a thing, and then I do the thing, and I build that trust through a transactional process, and then eventually you just tell it to me. So I'm curious, like, how what is that talk track like? Um,
Rodney, I'll let you take that one.
So one, I think we're talking about a couple of different things here, right? So the way I understand Rob's business is he's saying, hey, grain company, how do you leverage the data that you have to run your business more efficiently, right? I have this merchant originator mindset, Gabe, where I'm like, I don't give a crap about the grain company in a lot of ways, right? Like, this is not where my business is, right? So again, good working relationships, all that kind of stuff. But uh, as I'm focused on the farmer, it's like, hey, how do I leverage that data available to me at the farm level, right? And when I think about, okay, I'm a farmer sharing my information with a trusted individual inside of a grain company, right? I think that what I would say is, I mean, that doesn't exist over 100% of Cargill's customer base. And frankly, it probably exists across like 3% of Cargill's customer base where all those things line up. So they're essentially modeling the other 97%, right? And they're going to do that regardless of if that farmer shares his individual data. I agree. I think, man, we touched on it earlier where it's like, I always want to, if you show me data, Rob, from like a macro level, I want to like double click on it, double click on it, double click on it. Well, the thing about the grain business is it's hard to be in different levels at the same time, right? So if I'm talking to the farmer, I'm viewing the farmer's data and looking at it from his perspective, percent sold, on-farm storage. I don't really have a way to like take that context up into, oh, from a macro level, we want to be really long or really short here. It's just really hard to do. Um, and I think, mostly if there was one thing I could say to a farmer today, it's like, unless you live and breathe grain marketing and merchandising, right? You should probably find a trusted partner that's going to help you do that. That trusted partner could be at a grain company, could be the guy buying your grain. That's fine, as long as it's thing. You could hire some outside consultant to do something similar. But I do think there is a value to the farmer to have somebody, managing that risk is how I put it, or, helping them manage that risk, or at the very least saying, hey, I don't know what the market's going to do, but boy, you got a lot of risk on the table, right? You know, I don't know, Rob, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, well, I
Well, the
guess
only
Rob,
thing that I would,
I would frame it for you a little bit differently. Are you seeing anybody that's taking, as you work with them to say, hey, here's some of the insights, the next level insights you're getting from this. Do you see anybody like doing what you're saying? So on one hand, there's the risk to the business that there's this succession that seems inevitable, or this change in ownership. And then are they using that to step in and say, hey, like we're, can we help you in this way? Like, do you see anybody that does a good job of that, of extracting those second level insights and creating that value for the farmer?
yeah, some of the best ones that truly view themselves as a trusted advisor that wake up each morning and say, how can I add value to my farmer, customer, client? Uh, those guys are using it in a good way, pointing them in the right direction. May be a different level of expertise that they don't have, whether it's succession planning or, trusts and things of that nature. Um, the good ones do, in my opinion. But going back to kind of Rodney's points earlier, marketing grain each and every day, year after year is very complex, right? And, there's the futures component, which is one component of the price that, almost everyone has an opinion on that's been in the industry for quite some time. And then there's the basis component. And that's really an area. Again, if you aim to be a trusted advisor to your farmer clients, you can share with them a lot of information that helps them lock in the best basis and gives you a standard, margin that you can make money on year after year. You actually want that farmer to lock in a good basis level, right?
Yep.
That goes contrary to what some merchandisers out there think. They just want to buy low and sell high, right? But you'd be surprised, or I've been surprised, I'll say that, at, at how many merchandisers out there don't know what their 3 or 5 year average is as it relates to the historical basis. And so they're not able to share that with farmers. Simply because they don't have the data. It's shocking, right? But looking at those things, if you're currently paying 45 over and your historical basis for that time of the year is anywhere from 20 to 30 over, man, that's something worth paying attention to. And sharing that information with a farmer is valuable. It's a way to add value to them. And if you're making a standard margin at 45 over, right, it doesn't hurt you to share that information either. And that's going to help you build trust through transparency and get that farmer's business again next year and the year after that and the year after that when you help them make good decisions. So, again, that's one of the things that excites me about this opportunity is when you start looking at data, you know, for our base model, it's just connecting that grant accounting data, for the current year. And then from there, within that same data set, let's look at historical data. Okay, now that we've got a good sense of that, what other data points can we bring in? I talked about third-party data. If you've got that, great. What else can you bring in? Well, what about your mobile app data? What about your web site? Which farmers are looking at cash bids now? Those sorts of things. I know that gets really creepy and things like that. But again, if you're looking at through the lens of how can I add value to my farmer customers and how can I build trust with them and how can I help them gain value out of this data, then you're on the right track for a successful and sustainable business model, I believe.
What are you said, there's some good ones out there that you've seen, leaving Rodney aside for now. We don't want to be too kind to Rodney. What are some of the, you know, um, symptoms you would see of people that you think are using, those companies you work with that are using data in that way to add
Well,
value to farmer? What would you tell a farmer to look for?
yeah, that's a great question. Over the years with the different companies that I've worked for, some of the very best grain merchandisers that work for a company, they end up going into business themselves so that they can be truly non-biased.
Mhm.
And it's almost like, not everyone has a negative perception of banks, for example, but if you do have a negative perception of banks, maybe it's because when you walk in there, you're discussing the fees that they've charged you and the all the different things that are you know kind of reduce your net worth essentially. Uh, and that's not a great feeling to walk into a bank, a place that you've had a negative experience with. And when you go to a grain elevator that's docked you uh, for material or moisture, and that you felt was unfair, you're walking into those organizations and then someone is there trying to be a trusted advisor for you out of that location. So some of the best ones that I've seen have ended up getting out of those locations and setting up shop themselves
So you'd
and
want to see
just
some internal conflict, like if they,
right. But
well,
but
yeah.
that being said, there are people within organizations that truly live it every day about, I am here to add value to my customer base. The company that I work for treats me well, treats my farmers well, and you can have a sustainable business model in that sense too. And it's a decision, right? I mean, you have to have that, at the CEO level or the president level or the general manager, down to the frontline employees. And it can't just be driven by one employee on the inside. It's got to be a culture thing. That's been my experience. I still don't know if I'm answering your question, Gabe, but I think the best ones that I've seen have got the experience so that they can know the markets, know historic basis levels, know what drives basis, know what drives the futures, but then be able to share that information in such a way that it adds value to their farmer base.
And I mean, the other piece that you kind of tacked on right before that, though, was that it also looks like they're operating in a context where there's alignment, as far as you can tell from the top down, that is the way that they want to be. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I
And
mean, it
and
makes sense.
I know you guys all remember because we've all three worked for Cargill, but when I started with Cargill back in 2002, Dan Dye was there.
Mm-hmm.
And not every person remembers the vision of the company they worked for. But the vision was helping farmers prosper, creating mutual value. How easy is that to remember? And it's something that you can wake up and live each day and believe. And so I'm gonna create mutual value, one for my company, one for my farm customer, and I want to help them prosper. So it was fantastic, and it was a culture that started then. I know companies go through ups and downs and changes in leadership, but it's so important to develop that culture and that mindset that you're here, to add value to your customer base so that you can be in business this year and the year after that and the year after that. So
I think part of
Yeah,
me,
yeah, go ahead.
well, I was gonna say I might just be damaged because I mean, one of the big reasons we did so many farmer option schools was because people would did what we call premium offer, basically short a call, and then in their head they thought we were rooting on that call to be to go in the money, right? Because we sold
right.
rightly, or yeah.
Yeah.
And we
Their
weren't like,
perception is you bought it cheaper than the
yeah,
market.
we bought it from them, and so now we owned it, and we were like, and so a big part of option school was actually trying to help people understand, like, that's not how an option trader works. Like, we don't care what happens, as a trader, we don't care. We hope it fits into whatever your
Mhm.
marketing plan was, end of. And putting ourselves in a position where we could intellectually be honest with ourselves where that was true. Right. I mean, on the trading desk, we never want to be in a position. The way I framed it was, we never want to be rooting against our customers. Right. So if we've done a good job managing our portfolio and risk, what the customer does doesn't matter to us. Right. We want to make sure we're developing tools that are useful and interesting for them. But like, we never
Yeah,
want something where it feels like we're excited to be on the other side of.
Yeah.
Like, that's
absolutely.
that's a complete failure. Sorry, but Rodney, I think you were jumping in, but that was
Just the last thing. I never get a chance to talk about Dan Dye, and I would just want to say that during that time at Cargill, it was clear as day that there was total alignment. I have never worked for a company under a leader like Dan Dye where that was felt from top to bottom, and I just
Right.
knew that I would never be put in a situation where that wasn't true. I just knew that, so it was worth throwing out there.
Yeah, well, and all the way down to, very frontline employees, right? I mean,
100%.
it wasn't just senior and middle management. It was
No.
throughout the organization.
No, it was like the scale person, right? Like this the
Yes,
guy
right.
dumped the guy literally just, checking in tickets was like, "Hey, we're here for you, man. This is what we do." And it was just widespread. It was awesome.
Yeah.
yeah. I well, just go back to the Cargill stuff. I forget what it's not their, the Cargill overall guiding principles. You remember?
Mhm.
Do you guys remember what the first guiding principle was? We obey the laws of the countries we operate in. So when I was 22 and I saw that, I was like, "What the hell is this? Like, why do we have to put on here, that we obey the laws? Like, this is ridiculous." And then obviously, as I've gotten older, it's like, "Holy crap!" Like, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I get it
Yeah.
now. It's it's interesting. Obviously, well, whatever. I mean, I have now I haven't been at Cargill for almost 10 years, and things have changed quite a bit. But like, yeah, there are a lot of I have a lot of good things to say about that place, and I think one of the things they did a good job on most of the time was those types of things, right? Making sure there were clear tones, or not tones, clear organization, right? Organization
Yeah.
level goals that everybody understood, or could at least could understand. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and one of the things that excited me about being invited to your podcast, because I've listened, to a few of your podcasts as well, and I know I can say this for myself. I think I can say it for you guys as well. Is we're trying to make a change that we're proud of. And I've always been, I'm not going to call myself an innovator, but I've certainly always been an early adopter. Whether it's technology or whether it's options or whatever the case may be, I'm eager to embrace change, but I always want it to be a change that we can be proud of. So that's something that drives me every day, and especially with this new business, Innovative Grain, that's we're trying to add value and help companies make a change that they're proud of as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think the reason people are asking me if I knew you back in the day is because you were definitely that early adopter, Rob. I was very similar. I remember I subscribed to a magazine called Fast Company when I was in the grain business. And I remember a couple of bosses being like, "What is this? Like, why are you doing this?" And it's like, man, I like that. I want to learn from other industries and how I can apply that back to my industry, which, now I think that's really popular. 10 years ago, not nearly as popular for sure. Rob, when we
Yeah.
logged on this morning, I noticed I was on first, Gabe. We didn't acknowledge the fact that I was.
I think I showed up on time though.
I I showed up early to fix all my technical problems, but the second person on was Rob's AI bot that was going to record and take notes on the meeting, right, Rob? Yeah. Did you shut it off or did
I
it?
I think I did. I think
Okay.
out of habit.
Yeah, okay.
At
We
this.
can't see it.
That's
Sorry.
fine. Yeah.
No,
Well,
I
I either get that or the fact that I'm wearing Meta glasses now, and they're not recording, by the way, but I am listening to your voices through these glasses, and they're pretty cool. I like to use them as well.
I love where this is headed. So, uh, on the AI type of thing, Rob, I mean, obviously lots going on there. Do you see a usefulness to artificial intelligence inside like the very tactical grain business?
100%, 100%. I mean, it is truly one of those technologies that if you're not using it because you tried it 2 years ago and you saw that it hallucinated and got
Yeah.
something wrong, and so you dismissed it. What a mistake. You need to get back on board and try it again. Ask it that same question that you asked it 2 years ago. It's likely not going to make that same hallucination today. I mean, when you look at the power of neural networks and these, NVIDIA chips that made NVIDIA, be the largest company in the world as it is today to surpass Apple in a very short period of time. I mean, this is real. The data centers that are being built to be able to handle, the large language models. All this stuff is it's only going to get better. It's only going to get more practical. I'm not saying that jobs will be replaced. There's tasks I think that will definitely get replaced. Some of the repetitive tasks that I hope to help grain elevators with today. And that's not something that I was into ChatGPT 2 years ago when it first came out, and I thought it was cool then. But today you've got agentic AI and browsers like Comet from Perplexity that have agents built into them, and you can actually connect it to your email and your calendar and your other applications that you're working with, and ask it to do things on your behalf, and it will do it in the backgrounds. I mean, so 100%. There are ways that you can leverage AI today to make life more efficient. And the drive behind that is if you make my job more efficient as a merchandiser, then I can make life better for my individual clients. I have more time now to focus on them rather than these mundane tasks that have taken, 30, 40% of my time previously. So yeah, I hope I'm answering your question, Ronnie, but I am super excited. I mean, like I said, the base model for us at Innovative Grain is connecting your Microsoft Fabric to your grain accounting data. But that's just, I mean, you got to get your data strategy right. You got to
That's right.
get that foundation built. Once you get that foundation built with your data, then you can leverage artificial intelligence to leverage that data and make your lives easier and make it so much more efficient. So huge believer in AI and machine learning. And 2 years ago, I took a class from the University of Texas at Austin. It was called AI and Machine Learning for Business Applications. And machine learning is what a lot of people call AI. But with machine learning and Python and using whether it's a Jupyter Notebook or Google Colab, you can find patterns in unstructured data that will just blow your mind. And I'm quite certain if it blows my mind, with all the geekiness that I have access to, it will blow the minds of just regular individuals. So excited, and I know that whether you the other thing about AIs that I get excited about is MCP, Model Context Protocol. APIs have been a big thing for years, always have been, and I would dare say maybe always will be, at least some form of it. But now with MCP, Model Context Protocol, you can actually leverage the different LLMs out there. It used to be that companies had to pick one or the other. You had to pick Gemini, you had to pick ChatGPT, you had to pick Claude, you had to pick Grok, you had to pick Microsoft Copilot, right? Or DeepMind, the list goes on and on. But now it's very rapidly approaching the time where you build the infrastructure and then you access the best models out there, whatever they may be. You don't have to be tied to one. So really exciting stuff. Claude I use a lot because it's better at things, including coding, but also at writing. And not that I ever have it write for me, but as far as getting the context, the formats, things like that, it's super powerful. ChatGPT is always going to be on the leading edge. I think they're doing great, and the others are too. The advancements that they've made in the last 2 years are super powerful. If you're not looking at them today and you're listening to this podcast, you need to at least try some out and Google what some of the best use cases are for efficiencies and leverage it. You'll be pleasantly surprised, I think.
So if I'm a farmer listening to this podcast, Rob, like what are a few things you think I could use artificial intelligence for to better my business?
Sure. Basis in particular, you know, what are the nearby basis levels within a 75-mile radius, if that's your radius, right? Or a 30-mile radius, if that's your radius.
Yeah.
What are the best basis levels that are being reported out there? What is the 3-year average basis level, from my area? All of those things are easily calculated. And that's assuming that basis levels are posted, and I think it is, at least in the U.S. anyway. I can't speak for Canada, but in the U.S. anyway, a lot of them are posted. You'll find some processors in particular that are saying, "Well, yeah, that's our posted bid, but that's not our real bid." But I think those days are kind of getting short-lived too. I point towards Amazon and what's happened in the retail space. If you didn't think that transparency was important, just look at Amazon and the growth and the size that it is today. And plus, I always, he was talking about relating it to different industries. I used to, and still do today. Well, it's getting better, but I used to just absolutely hate with a passion buying cars. I mean, I hated it.
Yeah.
I hated that back and forth and them trying to make me feel I got a special deal. And so they go to the manager one last time, they come back and this is the best we can do. And I buy it and then I walk out and I see my neighbor that's driving the same model car that I am. And, I find out he got a better deal than what I got. And I hated that experience, right? And so it drove me, that along with some examples I could give with the Chicago Board of Trade as well. I prefer transparency. I feel like it's fair. I feel like it's a much better buying experience for me or selling experience if you're a producer.
Yeah.
If you feel like you're getting a fair price that everyone else is as well, your business, I think, will grow, especially if you also have employees that are following that culture that we all spoke of earlier.
Yeah.
So huge fan of transparency. And if you have a transparent markets, then you can leverage AI with just a few sentences, ask it the questions, and it'll provide the answers.
And I would say even like if your grain elevator isn't posting online, if you're doing a regional thing, it can generally tell you if basis is good or bad, right? Like that.
That's right.
I don't know, it doesn't have to be specifically elevator A is at this price usually. And I would say Grok for something like that, right, Rob? Like Grok seems to be more live than, say ChatGPT. Is that right?
Grok and Perplexity.
Perplexity. I haven't made the
Perplexity.
yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge fan of Perplexity.
I know.
I
Full disclosure, I'm a Perplexity business fellow, but
Okay.
they do get live information as well. It's from a different source. Grok, of course, has X to
Yeah.
pull from,
I
but they're both really good.
I was just going to throw out, Ronnie, as I think I've repeatedly shared my hesitation on leaning into AI or finding it's useful. I think when we had Jake on, maybe he talked about, hey, when there's a lot of data on something, that's when it's most helpful. So some of these questions we're talking about, right, like 3-year basis and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I've realized or learned it. So I am trying to stay engaged, right, and make sure that I'm staying on top as things get better. And like one of the big things that I think I've learned in the last 2 months is telling it to ask you questions, like in what. So as opposed to starting with asking it a question, like just like, hey, tell me the right price for this car. But like if I was looking to buy a new piece of farm equipment, I would totally say, hey, I'm looking at buying this new piece of farm equipment. Here are the things I'm thinking about. Can you ask me some more questions so that you can put together a good recommendation for me? It's a great thought partner for that, because it's not going to have the brand attachments that I think most of us bring with us, right? Like, oh, I've got 7 other pieces of John Deere equipment, and so my default would be to number 8 be there. Um, Yeah.
Yeah, so here's another one for you, Gabe, off that topic. I used to be a diesel mechanic in the Marine Corps, but today you can upload the owner's manual for a heavy piece of equipment and just ask it a question. How do I fix this? Troubleshoot this for me. And because it has that entire manual that it read in seconds, it can give you some very powerful information. And I'm just not that type of guy to go thumb through look through the index and the glossary, find it and, read. With today's AI, upload the thick manual, regardless how many hundreds of pages it is, and automatically it knows.
Well, yeah, I would say a far lighter version of that is I was playing a board game with my one of my kids yesterday, and like there's a like I couldn't find the rule like for something that was going. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, how do we do this? I was like, hey, ChatGPT, do you know the rules to this game? Yeah, sure do. All right, great. What do I do here?
Yeah.
Right, like, and it was great. Yep, here you go. Yeah.
Well, you know, I asked Perplexity today what the full carry was, for corn and soybeans, and using a particular interest rate and the cost of storage, and pow, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah, it really is. How about so same question, but I'm an originator or merchandiser at a grain company that I'd imagine that answer is different, right? What kinds of things should I be using them for there?
Well, one of the things that I got pretty passionate about in recent years was marketing, digital marketing, but even traditional marketing as well. And especially if you work for a large organization, you got to go through multiple different departments to get something approved before you can send it and things of that nature. But now with these LLMs, you can upload all of your branded content, including logos, the right colors, the very particular color blue or green that your company uses. And you can make sure that any marketing material generated fits those brand guidelines and your wording and things that have already been approved. So you have something that's ready to ship within minutes that looks really good, and you can tweak it. You don't have to be a developer. Just with natural language, say, no, I don't want that. I want a green tractor instead of a red one, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And you can just develop some really good stuff that you can then, market out to your clients so that they can be aware of maybe one of the new and latest, greatest products or ideas that you came out with. And it's already kind of with your current brand guidelines, colors, and approved material, et cetera. Fascinating use that merchandisers can use today. That especially if you get your marketing department, if you have a marketing department,
Yeah.
but if they've approved of it, then something you can roll with, right?
Mm.
Something that used to take days, you can now do it in minutes.
And in your experience, best model for that, that's Perplexity.
No, not necessarily. So here's the thing. I'm glad you asked that, Rodney. Because if you were to go to any grain elevator today and say, "Do you have any employees using ChatGPT or AI?" And they say, "Oh yeah, yeah, we've got a few guys. We got one guy who's really good at it." And you say, "Oh, so what LLM are you using? What model? What enterprise model do you use?" And they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, I'm not using an enterprise model. I don't know what he uses. I think he uses ChatGPT. He might be using Gemini. He could be using Grok. I don't know. He likes all of them, that sort of thing."
Yeah.
Well, that's dangerous, right? I mean, if you're an organization out there, you need to be on an enterprise model. Now, ideally, you're using an enterprise model that has access to the different LLMs, which Perplexity does. You can gain access to Grok, Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, all on Perplexity. So that's one of the reasons I'm a fan. Again, full disclosure there. But that's not important. I'm not pushing Perplexity. You need to make sure if you're an organization, small, medium, or large, that you're using an enterprise model. Because undoubtedly, some of the things we've talked about today, an employee is going to figure it out that, man, if I upload this data, it could help me do this. Well, if you're using a free platform out there and you upload data, then essentially you're saying it's okay for you to train yourselves on this data.
Yeah.
And you don't want that as an organization. You need an enterprise model. Now, enterprise models are easy to set up, but once you get an enterprise model set up, then you know it's secure. Then you have, language that your legal department can review to make sure that, or lawyer, if you don't have a legal department, to make sure that your data is secure. That way, you get some champions that like to use it, and then they can teach others because they're all using the same enterprise model,
Yeah.
regardless of which LLM it has access to. So that's one thing that I think is very important. I have talked to a lot of our grain elevators that say, "Oh yeah, we got guys that use it." I'm like, "Yeah, but are they using an enterprise model?" No. Well, then you need to be looking at that.
They're
Yeah,
teaching it how to help everybody else. Yeah.
you don't want some rogue kid dumping contract data out into chat.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Although a good use case, right? It could be a good thing to do. But yeah, do that inside your hub there or whatever.
Should
That's
we
right.
look at markets, Rodney?
Yeah, man. Yep.
So
Hey, before we do though,
yeah,
Rob, the Google glasses there. That what
Meta glasses.
Meta glasses. What's the benefit there? I'm intrigued.
Just learning the new technology. They've already come out with glasses. These, like I don't see anything in these lenses. They're actual prescription lenses.
Mm,
So they benefit me in that way. But, you can take a picture of it or you can record something for later use, which is good. You can take a picture of it and have it analyzed. What am I looking at? Uh, you know, uh, it, they're really cool things. They even have, models for the blind and impaired to help them, go across crosswalks and things like that. Look both ways, make sure nothing's coming. Is it okay to walk? Is all these sorts of things. Meta's really made a lot of advancements. For me, it's just cutting edge technology that I wanted to learn about and find some applications for.
yeah,
I don't use them often as much as I do just for things like this, where I'm communicating and listening to you guys through these glasses.
right.
Um, but yeah, I I haven't come across any huge applications for the grain industry yet, but I'm always looking.
So the thing I always wanted to use them for was facial recognition and then just knowing a guy's position, right? Like I never talk to a farmer. I would never call a farmer without first looking up what contracts he has on the books. I've always
Yeah.
thought, man, it'd be awesome if I just like looked at you and it just pulled up, hey, Rob's got these hedge to ride that he needs to set basis on. That
I could
That's
imagine
an interesting application.
you could train yourself model look at like grain quality. So like you pop in
Yeah.
somebody's bin, stick your head in. Ooh.
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
uh,
image
well,
image generation or image, reading images is something that AI is very good at.
all right, I'm gonna pull up, Ronnie. We haven't talked about beans in a while.
Yeah.
And so somebody asked me about Mark Tracy, who you might remember. He said, "What's going on with beans?" And so,
Oh,
I,
that's a
so
fun chart. Look at that chart.
I pulled it because it was borderline comedic, just how boring it
So boring.
was. Um, I,
Pretty neutral.
I mean, so this is a year worth of data right here, right? Just so
Yep.
we're all clear. Um, similar to corn, you would have had to been pretty far ahead to sell above where we are right now. Um, I mean, and so it took a dip last week. Obviously, lack of exports to China is hurting things. Good
Zero.
Brazil.
The number is
I
zero.
I saw zero versus what
That's a
is
big
the
one.
peak in October historically.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and obviously Brazil's had a good crop. I think the last 18 months, right? Like they've had a couple good years, and so unsurprisingly, reliable supply, sucking volatility out of the market. Any other than just kind of the drifting nature here randomly around some sort of 10-20 pivot, like what anything else, anybody talking about them, or they're just kind of like resolved to where we are?
The bean market's super interesting right now. So for one, there's a gigantic carry in the bean market. So right now, beans are going to space because there's more carry in the bean market than there is for corn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which hardly ever happens. Like at least in Northern Illinois, that's not a thing. So that's a little atypical. Yields in my neck of the woods are really, really good. Probably record crops for most guys. That's not the case all across the country. And then the thing not to forget about here, Gabe, is this looks like a really boring chart, and it is. We have been trading a dollar range, right? So you get
Yep.
up into the highest end of that range. Beans given yields in my area are pretty, above break even, right? Nobody's no balloons falling from the ceiling on the return on beans now. But then on the bottom end, it does get pretty scary. So when we hit that low back in August, I mean, that felt really, really bad for
Yeah.
these farmers here for sure. And again, that was before yield. So yield bumps, in my neck of the woods, guys are running like 5 to 7 bushel over what they kind of
Okay.
budgeted for. That's a big deal in beans,
Yeah.
makes a big
Yeah,
difference.
that's gonna, yeah. Yeah. I was looking at average yields. It was funny how much they've come up over the last 10
For
years,
sure.
15
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
And then the other thing I'd say locally is we haven't had a rain now. We had 1 inch maybe 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago was harvest days. And prior to that, we hadn't had a rain for like a month.
Mhm.
So super dry bean harvest has just been, as fast as they can bring them in, as fast as the elevators can take them. We're going to wrap up bean harvest here this week for sure. But we've had some real problems with field fires.
I was gonna ask. Yeah.
Yeah, been so dry. We had a monster one yesterday. It was windy. I woke up yesterday morning and it was a perfect bean cutting day. Uh, because actually the wind helps. Like when you're out in the combine and it's this dry and dusty, you can't see anything, like the bean dust just surrounds your combine.
Mhm.
So nice little bit of a breeze happening. And I told my wife, I was like, man, there's gonna be some fire here
It's gonna
today.
be a
That's
bad
not gonna
day.
be good. And
Yeah.
sure enough, we had a really big one about, I don't know, 15 miles east of my house. Um, yeah, so scary times, with that. But
A couple of things to add, as it relates to the soybeans. One is, as you look at the stocks to use ratio on soybeans, with corn is very comfortable right now. With beans, it's a good bit more tight. So there are some opportunities, for some upside because of the demand is really strong. The other thing is if you look at the market, what's driving soybean prices on the demand side is it's the oil for the first time. For years and years, decades, it's been meal that's been driving soybean prices. But now oil is the most dominant factor, the one that's driving the price for that, all driven by renewable diesel, of course. So when you look at it from a demand perspective, I always look at, whether you're comparing it to winter wheat or some other winter crop like winter canola, for example, do you want as you look to seek to diversify with maybe another crop, if you're in an area where you can. I know that's not necessarily the case for Ronnie's area,
yeah,
but um, you know, do you want to put your bet on renewable diesel, something that's driven by, energy, or do you want to put your bet on a carbohydrate? And to me, that's one of the factors that gives, a little bit of opportunistic view of soybeans. The other thing is, China is the other. China's been one of the strongest demand points for years. This is a little bit on the other side. The sensational demand just seemed like it was never ending for China, but now they switched a lot of that. Still have that same demand level, but rather than gathering it from the United States, they've shifted, to gathering it from South America. But regardless, that demand base is there. That's a story that, it may not be apparent in the markets from a structural position when you're looking at technical analysis today. I know the relative strength index and the slow stochastics are both very neutral for soybeans right now.
yeah.
But from a longer term perspective, those are some things that give you a little bit of hope for higher prices.
Yeah, good points, Rob. I gave the other thing, the high and low of those ranges as we've gone. You can
Yeah.
pretty much match up the high with uh, rumors that we were going to come out with some actual biodiesel policy and like cross some T's and dot some I's. And then the other side of it is, hey, trade negotiations did not go well with China this week, and it gets us to the bottom end. So that's that range of trade. Rob, I totally agree. I think I'm frankly more friendly beans right now than corn, really, because of that supply and demand situation.
Yep.
And this does have the smell. So one of the things I learned probably back in 1998 was the longer and quieter a market is, the bigger the pops are when it starts to go, right? Because everybody's using all the funds and tech folks. Rob, you talk about technical analysis, pull in a couple things there. I mean, they're all different, glorified versions of moving averages most of the time. And so as things get quiet, things just creep closer and closer to the current market, and it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy to some extent. So it seems ripe for fireworks if it starts to move one way or another. But yeah, corn.
Yeah, just a complete downward trend on corn here.
I should
You
remind
know,
everyone we're looking at weekly charts.
yeah, yeah, these are
Um,
weekly charts. So again, in my neck of the woods, corn yields are, appear to be pretty good. We don't have much corn out. We've been pretty much all on beans here, but the early corn that we've seen looks pretty good. Pretty variable though. A lot of guys passed on fungicide this year, and it's showing up in those yields.
hmm,
So I think the interesting story on soybeans is back on, I think it was August 12th, the USDA printed 188 bushel national corn number.
hmm,
Um, the second after they printed that, we started to rally. I think nobody actually believed it. Everybody was afraid they were going to print a number like that. Nobody actually believed it. That number is getting smaller for sure. We'll see where that shakes out. I think probably the trade's estimating 181, 182
okay.
kind of yield number on corn. I think that's still a record. So I'm sure it is. Yeah, that's still a record yield
Yeah.
on record acres, right? So hard to be super bullish when a 7 bushel reduction to a still record number
Yeah.
is possible. The other thing, just chatter in the industry, is that feed and residual number is kind of a placeholder for the USDA a lot of times to like smooth out, carry out, and it just feels a little high right now. Most people are saying 100 million to 600 million bushel high on feed and residual usage. That gives you a little more room to pull out down to a 182 and effectively end up with a 2 billion bushel carryout.
Yeah. I mean, I think, just to draw a line under it, right? We don't in markets that feel like they have a comfortable level of supply, like we wouldn't expect them to behave crazily. We would expect these slow moves. Panic is driven by a supply constraint coming in unexpectedly. So
Yeah.
so demand for some reason spiking or suddenly supply way under where expected. So yeah, I mean, it feels like it'll be quiet for 6 months. Not to say it won't go up or down relative, you know, based on how those yield numbers shake out, but it feels unlikely we would see a pleasant surprise to the upside at this
Yeah,
point.
last comment on the corn market is export demand's really good. So I am lucky to be really close to the river. So we've seen basis levels really strong all the way out through March.
Yeah.
And good carry in corn. So again, a little better carry in soybeans as it relates to space. But good carries in corn market too. So, the farmer is probably going to do everything he can to hold corn until June, July is the top of the carry kind of around here.
Rob, anything on corn?
Yeah, I agree with all of Rodney's points. I mean, I hope that 390 level holds as support. We're just in the first week of October here, and I know there were not a lot of farmers that were heavily sold going into this harvest, so there's a lot to sell. And then, from a cash flow perspective, I know a lot of farmers, are needing cash as well. It varies it goes back to what Rodney and I were talking about each individual farmer is different, but I hope that those 390 levels hold the support as you get into gut slot harvest here. And then, yeah, other than that, there's no big drivers to speak of. You just you want to see support, and then as we get into the planting season, we'll see what those ratios look at between corn and beans. But um, I wish the best for our farmers. My only hope is that input costs come down as we go into the planting seasons as well.
And then,
I already said last thing, but the other thing on the corn market, we are relatively close to crop insurance levels here, so it provides a little bit of support if we went down and tested that 390, but still just a bad deal.
all right. And then my favorite, December live cattle futures.
There you go. There's a good one. If you're a cattle
So,
farmer, you're smiling at this chart.
well, this is my macroeconomic U.S. leading indicator number, Rob.
Yeah.
So way back earlier in the chart around here, I said I think come September we're going to see it turn bearish, and I've been wrong, but I feel like it's like teasing, because we talk about the personification of markets. So obviously the market doesn't give a crap what I have to say about it, but it is entertaining to me that like we hit September and it's just like sitting here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. But I mean, so I'm certainly wrong about September being a turnover there. I
Well,
do
and
continue to just be
I'm
wary
sorry.
about that flipping. Yeah, so I'm like a broken record on it, but I think it's worth people, whether it's this or whatever folks are looking at. I mean, we are hitting the government shutdown's not going to help, right? With furloughs and things like that. I mean, the real leading indicator is probably unemployment numbers, but I think where we'll see that show up fastest, other than equities on the commodity side, is somewhere like this live cattle market, which has been um, it, fairly strong to the upside, and so it feels like it may be bubblish in short. Like I don't think that's a controversial view, but when those bubbles pop, it tends to be pretty violent. So
What's
Yeah.
your
Well,
favorite
and we're
cut of steak, Rob?
oh yeah. Well, it used to be. I always just hands down would answer that as a ribeye,
Yeah.
and it's still a favorite of mine. But I started looking at fillets, as well. But that's what's interesting, when you think about this chart. A couple of things when I look at it. If this were a corn chart, we could be fairly positive that, come March, April, that there are going to be record acres, right? And the market would react to this chart, and we'd have a record number of acres associated with it, which would, kind of temper the bullishness of this chart. And there are people that are buying cattle for the very first time in their lives. Even some Midwest farmers that are, they're trying to, react to this chart on the physical side. But it's not like corn. You don't just get all that cattle that comes to market immediately. It's a little bit of a
Yeah.
longer window there. The other thing is, you're asking me what my favorite cut of meat is, and the reality is that, you know, I'm still buying steaks. They are expensive.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I'm originally from Texas, but it's not just me. There are others, and then there are other countries that are still buying beef at these prices.
Yeah.
So, I do agree. We're in for some volatility as you look at this chart. I'm not so. I understand what you're saying, Gabe, about a bubble. I don't expect the trend to reverse here anytime soon. I do expect volatility, but my own personal bias is that we've got some strength in the market for the intermediate term. That's just my opinion,
and
along with volatility for sure.
I mean, and I hope that's right, right? Like, obviously, that drives stronger economics throughout the middle of the country, and for lots of reasons. And so that's the hope, right? And then the fear is the other side of it. All right. So, short answer though is Gabe's wrong again, and
Still,
so that's
still wrong.
still
We still wrong. And
continue
it's
to live that
always,
wrong life.
if you're thinking about buying the live cattle market, you should like check when we're going to be recording podcasts because it seems like right before the podcast is recorded, we go up there.
Yeah. I came really close to putting in an order the other day. Like I'm thinking about like a 2:30 stop. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk that specific. I guess if I'm saying I'm not. I don't want to be clear. Nobody should do what I'm doing.
Yeah, nobody. We're not.
It's a terrible idea. But I'm getting there. Yeah.
Rob, hey, first off, man, always good getting together with you. I think this has been really insightful for a lot of people. Any closing comments that you want to get off your chest?
No, again, for the three of us, and those that are listening out there, if you're one of those guys that are like us, and you want to make change, this is the time to do it. Get out there and make a change and make it be one that you're proud of. I think that's, for the closing comments for me is just get something that you can get excited, get behind it, and then make sure you're proud of it at the end of the day, especially if kind of look forward to that future and want to reflect on what you've been working on. Make sure it's something you're proud of, and you'll be happy, I'm sure.
Yeah, cool. And if I'm a grain company looking to hire your expertise, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so go to our website, www.innovativegrain.ai or www.innovativegrain.com. You can follow our company page on LinkedIn, or just give me a call, 309-319-8575. Happy to answer any questions you may have. And again, I really appreciate you guys inviting me to the show. The podcast you've done previously, a fantastic job. I'm excited for what you guys will continue to bring to the industry.
Appreciate it, man.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate the time today.
Yeah.
You bet, man.
Gabe,
Pleasure.
have a good
My
week.
pleasure.
Yep.